Taxi drivers of Reddit, have anyone actually jumped into your taxi and screamed follow that car? If yes, what happened? I was in New Orleans once and a cab I was in got sideswiped by a drunk driver. The drunk driver then took off. I told the cab to follow him, which he did. We ended up in a parking lot and we watched them go into an apartment building. Cabbie had the station call the cops. I wrote a statement for the cabbie and he called me a new cab while he wanted for the cops. Yes, but it's usually followed by I've always wanted to say that. I did that once as a passenger. We said it as a joke. We were in a group of 6 and couldn't fit in a single cab. So I went into the second cab and said, follow that cab. We expected the driver to laugh it off and ask for our destination. Instead, he just took off and followed the first cab. Oh, I'm not a taxi driver, but I was the passenger for a story that is similarly cliched. Back when I was an actor/active drug addict/alcoholic, what's the difference? I know, I had a director threaten to recast me a week before the show if I was late to rehearsal again. To put that into perspective, recasting a major role after rehearsals have started is generally unheard of, and almost unthinkable so late in the rehearsal process. She was really fed up with me. On this particular day, I was running late as usual and had 5 minutes to get to rehearsal. It was a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute drive. I flagged a cab, hopped in and said I need you to take me to this address and, if you can, I need you to step on it. The driver smiled wide and said I've always wanted to hear that. Cue him putting the pedal to the metal. Within 10 seconds we were approaching 65 miles per hour on a 30 miles per hour city street, weaving through traffic, clipping yellow lights too close for comfort, and generally whipping this cab around in an extraordinarily haphazard and irresponsible fashion. I was stunned, wide-eyed, in absolute shock and terror, unable to process that he quite literally heeded my request or that this was actually happening. I thought I was going to die. It was the best cab ride of my life. I was 2 minutes early to rehearsal. Friend of mine is a taxi driver and this has happened to him. An elderly man rushed inside his taxi and pointed out loud to follow a red Toyota. This man never explains why to follow, just tries to frantically call to somewhere. My friend asked multiple times if they need to call police, but the man just waved no and pointed to follow the car. They circle around the town, finally ending up to a front of a house where the car followed parks. As the car stop, man says hold on a moment, I'll pay. And jumps out of the car. An elderly lady steps out of the red Toyota and the man, apparently her husband, starts to scream, why did you left me at the mall? Woman is waving her hands screaming back, what are you screaming about, you are here. And walks inside the house like nothing has happened. Man returns and pays the drive, being sorry about it all at the same time. My friend thought they were following a burglar or something, but it turned out the lady just forgot her husband at the mall. Funny situation in a way, but sad in a way too, as my friend said. Dementia. Edit, sleepy typos. A personal trainer at my old gym did this. He saw a guy shoot another guy in the head and jump into a car, so he got into a cab so the shooter wouldn't get away. The cabbie followed the car for a bit until he learned that he was following a murderer, then he pulled over and refused. Turns out, the shooter was an undercover police officer, who sped away because he thought the victim's friends would get to the scene before the cops. I used to ride a pedicab, bicycle taxi, in NYC. A drunk finance bro told me to follow his friend who was running away. I caught him in about a block and a half. The bro jumps out of my trike not paying and tackles his friend. He then comes back to me and gives me $40. I drove a taxi one summer in a party resort. One night, 2 guys jumped in and yelled follow that car, which was another taxi that I knew the driver of and I obliged. Turns out, one of their mates was drunk AF and decided to just go to their hotel without telling them. They only saw the guy leaving the club drunk and they thought he was going to a strip club without them. He was actually going to their hotel, as he was hammered. Another time 3 girls jumped in the car and said follow that car. The car in question was a black sedan, tinted back windows. Yet wasn't that shady ho. We follow the car for 15 minutes, leaving the resort going into a forest. The girls start freaking out, as one of their friends, also a girl, was seen stepping into that car. Yeah, turns out, that she just hooked up with some guy in the club they were earlier and she was about to suck his D when we pulled up next to them. Weirdest summer. I followed the car. It stopped in a suburban house. Dude went into the house. They were his family and didn't have room for him with them. A _____AF__/A. This sort of happened to me about 20 years ago. Not a taxi driver, although I was driving down a main road and saw a dude running around with a baseball bat and then cop cars parked on a side street. Young me decided that I want to get involved, so I pulled down the side street and found a cop on foot a good distance away from his car. I told him about baseball bat guy and he gets on his radio. Guess he got an immediate update on his radio, looks at how far he is from his car and he says, "Can you drive me down the road?" I'm thinking flip yeah, and tell him to jump in. He does, and I am seriously driving around back roads with a cop riding shotgun giving me directions while on his radio. Only lasted for about 2 minutes and then he jumps out to pursue the guy on foot. Not a very satisfying ending to the story, since I never found out what happened. But damn it, that's my story. I asked a taxi driver that question many years back. He said that happened on 2 separate occasions and both times, a wife was trying to catch her cheating husband committing adultery. Update: I have been getting a lot of comments on whether the husband cheated on the wife twice. I'm not sure about that, but the story that I was told was 2 different couples. Also, one of the wives actually caught her husband meeting his mistress. Not entirely related, but I once had somebody jump into my car and I wasn't even a taxi. I was driving down the street in Boston and was stopped at a red light, minding my own business. Suddenly, my passenger door flung open and someone climbed in. Completely shocked, I didn't even have time to react. For some reason it never entered my mind that I should be alarmed or concerned about this trespasser, so when I saw that it was an elderly lady I just remained calm. Without skipping a beat, she said in a thick Russian accent, "You take me home, please." So, I started driving. I asked where she lived but she just said, "Keep going, I tell you when to stop." At that point it dawned on me that she probably had dementia and that she likely thought I was someone she knew, or maybe even a taxi. Nope. After a few minutes of conversation it was abundantly clear that this woman had simply picked the first car she saw, gotten in, and requested a ride. During the 10-minute car ride she asked about my life. I was in college studying psychology at the time, and when I told her this she said, "You make good psychologist, very nice boy." It put a big smile on my face. My grandparents had all died either before I was born or during early childhood, so I don't think I had ever had an elderly person say something like that to me. It felt nice. Finally we reached an apartment building and she told me to pull over. When I put the car in park she turned to me and said, "Thank you driving me today." I assured her it was no problem at all and wished her the best, and her parting words to me as she climbed out were, "Very good boy, good luck with studies." After pausing for a moment, I drove away and just kind of let it be. It was such a nonchalant and comfortable interaction that I resisted my temptation to immediately text friends to tell them what had happened. It felt like that would have cheapened it, or turned it into a novelty. It was just so natural and I went with it. She's unlikely to be alive at this point, but I hope she enjoyed the rest of her days. Godspeed, Russian grandma I had for a day. Not quite what Up asked, but almost a colleague of mine, a UK police officer, was on foot patrol and saw a robbery in the distance where a driver was pulled from their car and the robbers drove off in their car. My mate did exactly as Up has said, stopped a civilian car and said, "Follow that car." The driver apparently went wild trying to keep up with the robbers, all the time with a uniformed police officer in his passenger seat, giving a commentary to his base. They lost the stolen car, and my colleague asked his driver to stop. He got out, and let the driver go without asking his details. As the driver went into the distance, my mate realized he'd taken out his peg, truncheon, in the car and left it on the dashboard. Luckily the driver rang in later and it was returned. No idea what happened to the robbers, stolen car, or victim, sorry. I had a fare jump in my car, who immediately started berating about my car, and how Uber does not allow drivers to use 2-door cars. This came as a surprise to me, because I was not, and never have been, an Uber driver. I was just parked in front of the hotel waiting for a friend. I'm actually a taxi driver, bike taxi / pedicab. I was hanging out a corner when a co-worker of mine got a ride across the intersection. Suddenly a guy walks up to me and tells me to follow that cab, but keep a distance. This guy looked current or ex-military, demeanor, haircut, attitude. Has one of those earbuds like the agents from the Matrix. Exuded the vibe of being very professional / competent and not giving a flip at the same time. So I was born for this moment. I read all the Tom Clancy books as a kid, all the books about spycraft during World War II and the Cold War, every spy movie ever made, etc. I kept about 100 yards distance and then would accelerate when they went around a curve anytime they were near a light or intersection. I have all the lights memorized, to ensure we would make the same light but a little later than they did. At one point a car pulls up alongside and another guy switches places with the original guy and we keep going. After about 12 blocks the pedicab pulls over ahead of us and the guy tells me to pull over. Hands me a $20 for a $12 ride, although I would have done it for free just to live my 9-year-old fantasy. Probably just local cops, but I can dream. Not a taxi driver, but one time after a work party a bunch of co-workers and I were going to a different bar and we needed to take cabs. A few of us got into one and the rest in another. One of my co-workers told our cabbie, "Hey, if you can beat that other cab, I'll give you an extra $20." The cabbie smiled in the rear view and said, "Okay, buddy." He started weaving between cars until he got in front of the other cab. Then he perfectly timed it so he could get the other cab stuck at a red light while he just made it past. With that head start he had no need to really rush and he calmly got us to the bar first. I think he actually really enjoyed it and got a pretty nice tip for a short trip. My father was a taxi driver for quite a while. It never happened to him, for which he was eternally disappointed. He did, however, once get run over by his own car. Edit, adding story of getting run over due to popular-ish demand. Okay, so this was in the mid-90s, in southern England. Like many taxis of that vintage, he was driving a diesel Citroën BX. Also, like those cars, it had been driven into the ground. In any case, he was dropping off a little old lady at her house at the top of a hill. Being a gentlemanly sort, he helped her out of the back seat, and escorted her around the front of the car. The handbrake cable snapped while they doing it, and the car began to roll down the hill. He pushed the lady out of the way, and got hit. Car dragged him about 100 yards down the road before a guy out on a run was able to jump in and put his foot on the brake. He was mostly okay, had a pretty severe friction burn/road rash down one of his legs and up his back. He had to have x-rays on his ribs too, but they turned out not to be broken or cracked. The little old lady threatened to sue, because in his haste to get her out of the way, he pushed her over and she broke a wrist. Old bones, presumably. Fortunately the company's solicitor was able to head that off, could make the case that he saved her life, I suppose. When I found out later, I'd have been 14 or 15, I laughed my ass off. I mean, who gets run over by their own car? Didn't take long to realize how lucky he'd been, though. I left my flute on a bus. I was not about to get my ass hooped for forgetting my $1,000 silver hollow stick on my way to orchestra practice. Not a cab driver, but once at port in Spain on deployment we were late in getting back to ship, so we jumped in a cab and said there's a good tip your way if you get us there before 10:30. We were there by 10:15 and it was the scariest car ride of my life. It was amazing. Friend driving a cab had this happen once. It was college students out on the town and their friends got into a cab just prior to them. Yes, he chased it to wherever they went. Tipped him nice, he said. Very anticlimactic. This is gonna be chopped up into a 19-page BuzzFeed article tomorrow. Not a taxi driver, but when I was 18 driving home late at night in Seattle and I was rear-ended by a guy, and when I tried to call the cops from a payphone, it was 1992, he pulled a gun on me and told me to get in his trunk, so I knocked him down and ran, and luckily there was a cab sitting there at a red light, so I got to jump into it and yell, "Drive, just drive." He didn't hesitate, just took off. Dude stayed with me at the 7-Eleven until the cops came. I won't forget that. I was pretty shaken up. If you're out there reading this now, thanks taxi driver dude. I've done it to a cab driver. I parted ways with a friend, and as soon as they got into their cab, I realized that I left my phone in their bag. In a panicked state, I grabbed the next cab and told him to follow the cab a block away. I had to explain myself because I didn't want to seem like a creep. He obliged and I had him sidle up next to them so I could get her attention. Both cans pulled over and I got my phone. Not the most exciting story, but it still applies. I live in a fairly big city and drive a normal looking car. I have people get in all the time thinking I'm an Uber. When I tell them I'm not, they usually apologize, but I had one person tell me I should have a sign. What? Oh God, I have a really bad story for this. I used to drive a taxi for my uncle's company. A guy gets in my taxi, says just follow that car, and reassures me it's nothing serious. Except when the other car stops, he gets out and runs to the car we were following and drags the guy out and starts hitting him in the face, hard. I got out and was yelling at him and calling him an asshole for lying to me, and he got all in my face and threatened to beat the shit out of me too, said a bunch of racist slurs at me, then ran off. The guy who got punched had his nose broken. The weirdest part is that he had no idea who that guy was. Wasn't a taxi, and this kind of flips it around, but my partner and I had some guy take off on us on foot and we were chasing him down a semi-major road, but he was smoking us. Some random person in a minivan pulled over, yelled "jump in," and then dropped us off just in front of him. The guy was totally gassed by that point and just proned himself out on the ground when we jumped out. Seriously, was like something in movie. A man was trying to pick up some garbage, he was a dumpster trucker or whatever, and his pal drove off thinking he was in the back. The man ran to my car, kept knocking on my window and said to follow that truck in a voice so loud NYC could hear, and hopped in. I'm pretty sure I drove a red light to get to the dumpster truck. He paid me a 20, so it was worth it. I was actually the person who jumped in the car and said follow that bus. And then try to get to the next stop before the bus, please, it's important. I had forgotten my phone, and that was the only thing I could think of. There was no way I'd outrun the bus, had to cross a big boulevard and wait at the traffic light, and after that it was a long stretch where I'd stand no chance. The guy actually made it, and even told me to just go and not pay anything. To be fair, it took him like a minute or two anyway, but still, so cheers to you, random genuinely nice taxi driver, you are a gentleman and a scholar. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more top AskReddit posts read out loud.